Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 724. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about river rafting and fossil hunting, dinosaurs, pictographs, and petroglyphs as we go to Dinosaur National Park and Rocky Mountain National Park in Northwestern Colorado. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about a couple wonderful national parks. I'd like to welcome to the show Sam and Mina Oppenheim. Sam, you may remember from being on the show way back. You can find Sam's photography at samoppenheim.com. Sam and Nina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us on, Chris.
So great to be here.
And I say Sam hasn't been on the show in a while. We figure it's something like 10 years, a marriage, and two kids later that Sam is back. But he was on in the early years talking about Bali and northern India and Laos, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. But you are talking something a little more domestic this time. What are we talking about today?
So mostly the national parks in northern Colorado. I figured because of COVID, we did a little domestic travel, and there's some amazing sites up there. Dinosaur National Monument doesn't get enough attention, and Rocky Mountain National Park is among a lot of people's favorites.
Excellent. And you did this as part of a larger RV trip this year.
Correct. So we did our first ever family RV trip, and we did all four corners: Arizona, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. But a lot of what we covered has been covered by your show before, like the Route 66 stuff in New Mexico and Arizona. We did that. And you recently had a podcast about the national parks in Arizona off the beaten path beyond the Grand Canyon. So we don't want to repeat anything.
It's getting tougher. So we do repeat some things these days. In fact, I'm going to try and repeat the show we did on Laos coming up here sometime. I'm just looking for a guest. So let's focus in then on Colorado, which I think we decided was about a week-long portion of your trip.
Yes.
And you were doing this by RV.
Right.
Excellent. And where should we start?
If you're going to do it just all on its own as a 1 week, one-way road trip, you could fly into Salt Lake City and fly out of like Boulder, Denver area.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to really want to talk about Salt Lake City that much. So I think, could we just start in Dinosaur National Monument at the border of Utah and Colorado?
So we're up in the northwestern corner of Colorado when we're in Dinosaur National Monument.
Correct. It's most of the monument is now in Colorado, but the part with the dinosaur quarry is in Utah. And it's one of those parks that stretches across the border. And it's absolutely incredible. It's actually 210,000 acres and includes 2 river canyons, both the Green and Yampa River canyons. And so some people think, oh, it's a national monument, it's not as big as a national park. Well, actually, it's a lot bigger than some national parks. So the designation national park is more congressional and national monument is presidential.
Right.
It doesn't determine the funding or the size or value of visiting the site.
Right, exactly. So, and I have spent some time in Dinosaur National Monument, but I've done exactly the opposite of the things that you've done. So tell me a little bit about your experience, first of all.
Yeah, so what we did is we stayed in an RV campsite outside of the park, but actually we're going to recommend that anyone doing this trip stays inside the park. It's just going to be a better trip. I'm talking, this whole tour that we're going to be doing here is more of an outdoorsy type of tourism. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you were to reserve the campground at either Split Mountain or Green River on the Utah side of Dinosaur National Monument, you would then be inside the park. It's a beautiful campground right on a quiet stretch of the Green River. And all these campgrounds can be reserved on recreation.gov. And you could do it with an RV, you could do it with a tent. But if you wanted to stay outside, there are places you can stay in Jensen, Utah, which is kind of the border town for the National Monument in Utah, or in Dinosaur, Colorado. They named the town after the monument.
Okay. And neither of those are all that large a town, as I recall. I think the largest town in the area is Vernal, Utah, which is a little further west than Jensen. And actually, we should mention that if you're into dinosaurs, which hopefully you are if you're going to Dinosaur National Monument, there is actually a lovely museum in Vernal, Utah. Not a large museum, but you can see some velociraptors and things like that. So especially if you're there with kids, and I think you were traveling with 2.
Mm-hmm. We were.
That's someplace that I would recommend.
Yeah, we were on sort of a long drive from Bryce Canyon up to Dinosaur National Monument. And so we drove through Vernal, and we made sure to stop at some of those dinosaur statues that are in town. We weren't, unfortunately, able to stay for the museum. I don't know if it was open, actually, right now.
Yeah, a lot of museums here in 2020 not open. Yeah.
But it was great to see those the statues in town.
If you like photo ops with giant roadside dinosaurs, you won't be disappointed on this road trip.
I'd forgotten. I don't remember large dinosaurs in Vernal. Okay.
Yeah, Vernal has a couple famous ones, and recently the Tyrannosaurus had a face mask on it. So they kind of dressed them up for the seasons. Basically, each of the towns and a lot of the gas stations and hotels have giant dinosaurs.
Excellent. Actually, the other thing I would recommend in Vernal, in a show that we said was going to be about Colorado, is getting out to the McConkey Ranch, which is just outside of town, and for a $4 donation, you can go in and see some native petroglyphs. And we're going to get more chance to talk about petroglyphs, but this is one of your chances to see some wonderful art that is just on a private ranch just outside of Vernal. Easy hike to get there, and very interesting.
Oh, cool. So, I mean, the reason I want to talk about Dinosaur National Monument is because I don't think it gets enough love. I think it's a fantastic Park Service unit that should be on everyone's list of to do someday.
And especially if you have children who are really into dinosaurs, it's really awe-inspiring.
It's incredible for the dinosaurs, but there's much more beyond that. So let's start with the dinosaurs, though. Okay. The visitor center right in Utah, near the border with Colorado, is the Dinosaur Quarry Visitor Center. And what you're going to do there is, and the reason why the park was originally established is that they discovered dinosaur bones in a part of uplifted sediment where they're fossilized. And the original dinosaurs that were removed are in national museums all over America. But then the person who excavated them said, it would be really nice to leave some in the stone and let some visitors come and see the bones still in the stone. And that's what they've done. So when you go to the visitor center and you get up to the quarry, currently you take a shuttle because of COVID, but in other times of year, you might be able to park at the quarry. It's only a 5-minute shuttle ride. You go up and you see a wall that's vertical because of the uplift of the geology. And on that vertical wall, just spitting distance from where you're standing, are thousands of dinosaur bones with interpretive displays. And you can really understand a lot about them. And then you can also see a map of where all the dinosaurs are that were discovered there. And the bones have gone to museums all over, including Pennsylvania, Colorado, I think Ontario, Washington, D.C., and New York.
Interesting. I didn't get to this part. That is more unusual. I don't know that I have seen that any other dinosaur dig that I have been to. Not that there's a large number that I've been to.
Yeah, and it's really incredible. It was one of those kind of situations where the dinosaurs are jumbled up. It's not like one dinosaur. This is one of those places where, due to the death and then the collection of the bones, and then they were cemented into fossils underground, it's more than one species. It's more than one type of dinosaur all in one assemblage. And when you go through the quarry visitor center, you start at the upper level, so your eyes are level with the middle of the quarry. But when you go to the bottom level, there's a section where you can actually touch the dinosaur bones. And you should see the size of my children's eyes when they got to touch fossil dinosaur bones.
It was exciting.
Very cool.
There are so many bones on the wall. It's like a jigsaw puzzle to see different pieces of the vertebrae and the ribs and the leg bones. And it was just incredible to even just do a search and find what can you see on this wall. It's amazing.
Well, and you say that, and when you see them assembled, for you guys who are based out of New York, in the museum there, the Natural History Museum in New York, and they're all together one skeleton, you don't appreciate all the work that went into somebody going, okay, I've got an ankle. Does someone have a foot?
Absolutely.
As they're digging through all these things. Or does this go with this dinosaur? Which is the other question that comes up, I'm sure.
And sometimes you'll hear in the news that they've had to change something in some of the museums.
It definitely gives you that appreciation of what an incredible job it is to be a paleontologist.
Interesting.
So on my recommendations for what to do, the first thing is, if you're going the direction we're going, which is from west to east, would be to stop at the visitor center and the dinosaur quarry. Then if the weather is permitting and you feel okay with mobility, there's a tiny trail called the Fossil Discovery Trail.
Okay.
And basically, you're walking from the dinosaur quarry back to the parking lot at the visitor center. I wouldn't recommend doing the trail round trip. I would recommend taking the shuttle to the quarry and then walking the trail back to your car.
Okay.
And what you do on that trail is, so the uplift in this area is fascinating. What's happened, and you'll see this throughout the whole park, is because of the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, this is the place where all of the layers that would be like sandwich layer caked, usually like at the Grand Canyon horizontally, have been instead turned up vertically. So as you walk north, south, or east, west, depending upon where the trails are aligned, you'll be going forwards or backwards in time, and the color of the ground and the texture of the rock will change as you walk, because it's not horizontal, it's vertical now.
Okay.
So the Fossil Discovery Trail takes you to before the dinosaurs, where you can see marine fossils, to then the dinosaur sort of time period where you can actually, on foot, under the sun, find dinosaur bones that aren't labeled and just touch them, like right in the rock, just like in the visitor center. But now you're outdoors, and they're not marked, they're not labeled. So you just have to, like, we told our kids, like, find one. It was great. Yeah, so that was fantastic. And that's all very easily done when you're in your car visiting the visitor center. But we're recommending that people go far beyond just that visitor center.
Okay.
So the next stop on this itinerary would be the Split Mountain Green River area. And there's two campgrounds, the Split Mountain Campground and the Green River Campground. Split Mountain Campground's year-round, Green River Campground's summer only. And both of them are along this beautiful stretch of the Green River. And it's a very calm area, and it's gorgeous. It's called Split Mountain, though, because the river has cut through a mountain, and it just kind of looks like Half Dome. It looks a lot like Yosemite's Half Dome, but it's a little bit smaller, but it's down at the river level, and you can see a lot of the geology in it. And when you're up there on the drive down, there's one of those great placards in the National Park Service has put together that tells you all the different layers of the stone that you can see from the overlook. And it's all the different colors of the stone. It's like, well, this is this million years, this is that million years. And it's just a beautiful, calm area. You can go fishing. There's little hiking trails there. The geology is incredible. And I'm recommending that people actually camp there one night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had the opportunity to just have a picnic in that area where we had lunch. And we thought, oh, wow, this would have been a really lovely place to camp overnight. It was very nice.
Then I think maybe we should ask you about your trip, since now we're at the river level.
Right. Yeah. So I've spent 3 days in Dinosaur National Monument, but I have only seen what you can see from the river, which is quite the opposite. So way back in Amateur Traveler, we did a show with the now late founder of Oars Outfitting, George Wendt. And we talked about rafting the Grand Canyon, which is still on my bucket list. But rafting the Grand Canyon is hard to get onto, and it takes a week and things like that. And I asked him towards the end of the show, if you didn't have time to do this, if you wanted to do, or if you wanted to do something last minute and you couldn't do the Grand Canyon, what's your second favorite rafting experience? And what he said was the Green River here in Dinosaur National Monument. The Gates of Lodore is the particular area that you're talking about. And then afterwards, he hosted me, or Oars hosted me on a rafting trip in this area for 3 days. All I had to do was get my way there, and which is why I was in Vernal, Utah, for instance. That's where they take off from there, and they come back to that. I'm sure you could do it on your own, too, if you had your own raft. But once you're in the canyon, it really does take 3 days to get through, and there are no roads that go down into that portion of the canyon.
If you look at the map for the monument, I mean, it's gigantic. And the Green River flows through that canyon for, the whole entire length of the park. When we got there to the visitor center, they said this is one of the only national parks other than the Grand Canyon where you can legally river raft throughout the whole entire national park, national monument.
Yeah. Well, and it's a popular thing to do. We certainly weren't the only raft on the river there, and so you obviously you go with an outfitter usually. We were going with large oar rafts rather than paddle rafts. I tend to like to do the paddle rafts where you're doing more work, but they also had brought along, I think, 3 or 4 small inflatable kayaks. So I spent a lot of time in the kayak, and they would let you on a lot of the rapids, because there are rapids in here. I think level 3 and 4, if I'm doing this from memory. Nothing level 5. But with some of the rapids, they would let you do them in the kayak. And so you would have a much more personal experience with the rapid as you're doing it that way. So that was a fantastic experience that way.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds. Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com. And don't just travel, explore.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
And again, because of the uplift, as you're going through the canyon, it's the same thing as you were saying, where you're changing and going, and I'm trying to remember if you're going from the newest stone to the oldest stone, or the oldest to the newest, and it's been a few years back, but they're pointing out the different types of geology that you're seeing along the way. We did not see any dinosaur bones in Dinosaur National Monument, but what we did get to do, for instance, was go out and see some of the petroglyphs. You would do some hiking out to, and now these would be pictographs, so they're cave painting, well, not cave, but on the canyon side, not carvings.
Okay.
The difference between a pictograph and a petroglyph is a little subtle there. But then they would also see different, especially ocean-going fossils, shells and things like that in some of the canyon walls along the way. So fascinating, wonderful adventure I would highly recommend. Again, I don't think Oars is the only outfitting company that is doing that, but I know they still do that run as well.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that to people who have the time. Did you have to portage at all, or you just
No, there's no portaging.
Okay.
The river is well, at least in most years, the river is a deep enough river, strong enough river. There's also really strong winds that blow through the canyon, and sometimes those winds are blowing against you, which time the smart people got out of the kayaks and back into the oars boat and let the professionals do the work, but I was not always the smart people that way. And the water is very cold. It's snow melt. I didn't realize how cold the water was. One day I was kayaking all morning, and you're in the inflatable kayaks, you're wet. Right, in this kind of thing, the water gets in, but you don't feel that cold because you're trying to row against or paddle against the wind and things like that in the canyon, and so you're staying warm. And we got to lunchtime and got out of the kayak, and I just started shivering. I didn't realize how much body heat I had lost to the river. They quickly got me into a dry shirt and a towel around me, but the water is not very warm. So, fascinating trip. Wonderful trip. I would recommend.
That sounds amazing.
But again, I haven't seen parts of the park that you've seen.
Right. So the last thing I wanted to mention about my end of the park that I saw is there's a great dirt road. So from the Split Mountain area, you would then drive quite a few miles, probably about 5 miles to the dirt road. And you're actually like kind of like leaving the park a little bit and then going back in the park. So you're like driving by a private farm. And then when you get to the dirt road, you can see some amazing petroglyphs. And so like you were saying, the distinction being that these are picked into the rock. So the rock has a color that's been aged into the surface, and the petroglyphs are then where you peck at the rock and you've removed the surface so that you can see a brighter color underneath. Whereas I think you said you saw some pictographs which are more painted on, right?
Right.
So there's amazing petroglyphs there right on the dirt road. You don't have to do a very long hike at all. And then at the end of the dirt road is Josie Morris's cabin. And this is a homestead cabin that's been preserved. And it was established by Josie Morris in 1914. And this is a very intrepid woman who lived out here in what seems to us in the modern era to be the middle of nowhere, but it was very successful for her as a homesteader. And she lived there from 1914 until 1964, for about 50 years. And she had a very amazing life. If you read up on her on the internet, there's all these stories about how she married 5 times. She divorced 4 times in a time when divorce wasn't that common. She made brandy and wine from local berries during Prohibition. And she was reputedly very friendly with outlaws, including Butch Cassidy. So you can go there and tour her homestead, which is a beautiful log cabin structure. And you can hike on the trails that she used with her animals. There's these box canyons. So it's a 3-sided canyon. And she would just put her animals in there. But now you can just go hike up in there, and there's great echoes, and it's a very short hike, and they're kind of shaded because you've got like trees and foliage, plus the walls of the canyon shade you from the sun during the morning and afternoon.
And Josie was so successful as a homesteader that she lived there up into her, I think, until she was 90 years old, right?
Yeah.
She passed away in 1964.
Yeah.
It seems odd.
She was incredible.
To use the word homesteader and talk about somebody who died in my lifetime. I think of homesteading and the West, the cowboys and Butch Cassidy and those things as being something way back in history, although this is probably a good time to mention. So I know that the last roundup in Colorado, in terms of when they put up the fences, when it went from open prairie into more fenced land, happened during my grandfather's lifetime. So he was born in the late 1800s, came over to the U.S. when he was an infant, and was, I think, 16 and was in the last roundup in Colorado. So wow. That was late 1800s, early 1900s. And so that time period where she is homesteading here is that transitional time where the West is changing from the West that we know from the stories. In fact, if you've seen the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, that's kind of part of their story, is that things are changing and they kind of don't fit into the model of what things used to be.
Yeah, if you do the drive south through Utah, you can go to Butch Cassidy's childhood home.
Sam, have you seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid?
I think I saw it like 15 years ago, but I can't remember it that well.
I haven't seen it ever. I think I'm going to put it on my list now.
We'll have to watch it.
So yeah, he and the Sundance were killed in 1908.
So that's kind of that end of the era in Bolivia, which you'll see in the movie. But anyway.
One last thing before we leave Dinosaur, it is an international dark sky site.
Oh.
And so it's a great place to stargaze. And they do have, during non-COVID times, I think Ranger-led dark sky stargazing at night. They also have a great junior ranger program, as do most of the national parks.
Yeah, that's something that if you have kids of a certain age, I think you've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, great ages for the Junior Ranger program. And the national parks I'm just such a fan and of the rangers in general, the national parks, but the Junior Ranger programs are awesome.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's so funny because we ended up bringing a whole lot of things for the kids to do on our RV trip. And it turned out that with all of the Junior Ranger programs that we participated in, they had these great books they could do activities in, and we're learning about the sites and just learning a lot about our national parks. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that my love of national parks is related to my love of travel because I learned to love traveling as a kid in the West in the national parks at your kids' ages. So there you go. You never know where that will lead to.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, our daughters really liked the Junior Ranger program, and I was kind of like hinting that you could be a ranger when you grow up. Yeah, I don't think they would necessarily choose that career, but I find that kids sometimes like think of their future career as being basically between being like a teacher, a doctor. There's like a few things they think of. The things they interact with regularly, they're in school, they go to the doctor's office. But I wanted to encourage my kids to see these other options out there. And so I made sure to talk to the Rangers as much as I could with our face masks on during COVID time, socially distant.
Excellent. Is there more we want to cover on Dinosaur National Monument?
I just want to put a plug in for the canyons that we walked in, again, near Josie Morris's cabin.
Okay.
We did a hike at Box Canyon that Sam mentioned. Pretty short hike.
Yeah, these are short hikes. We have
maybe
kids.
Less than half a mile.
Yeah.
We just had so much fun, though, in that canyon with the echoes, and the kids just had a blast with that. Imagining Josie with her animals in that canyon. So it was a nice stop.
Excellent. Where to next?
So on our trip, we drove from Dinosaur National Monument through Colorado to Grand Lake to then set the stage for Rocky Mountain National Park. Mm-hmm. But I do want to mention two things on that drive. One, well, as soon as you enter Colorado, they have all these signs for like Dinosaur Dispensary if you want to do the marijuana tourism thing. But then Mina and I started driving on this route called 40. And we were like, this looks like the kind of road where there's going to be a sign that says no gas for 50 miles. And then I passed a town and it said no gas for 49 miles. So if you do this road trip, there is that consideration. There is a long stretch of nothing in between Dinosaur National Monument and the next town with services. But I would recommend a stop overnight or for part of a day at Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Which is about 2.5 hours from Dinosaur National Monument and about 2 hours from Grand Lake. So it's kind of in the midpoint. And they have a Stagecoach State Park if you want to do some state park camping. During the winter, they have a great ski resort. And year-round, they have these famous hot springs that during COVID, you have to go on the website and get a timed ticket for. But during non-COVID, it's basically free. I mean, they want you to spend money there, but the hot springs, I think, are free. And so I think it's a great place for people to know about if you're going to be doing this itinerary. And they have amazing restaurants. I mean, people go there with a lot of money to ski and as a resort. So some of those restaurants are really fantastic.
Yeah, I have not been, but certainly heard about Steamboat Springs for years.
So from there, we go to Grand Lake, Colorado. If you want another hot spring destination, there's a Hot Sulphur Springs about an hour from Grand Lake, which also has hot springs, but it's less popular than Steamboat Springs. In Grand Lake, Colorado, we stayed at the Elk Creek Campground and RV Park. They have cabins. You can bring your own tent, you can rent a teepee, or you can bring an RV. And this is just 2 miles from the national park. And we were there, and when we woke up in the morning, the staff there were fantastic. The facilities were fantastic. And they said, "Hey, there's a moose." We're like, "What?" We're like getting ready to brush our teeth. And they're like, come here. And there was a moose right there where we were staying.
I don't think of moose and Colorado in the same sentence. Okay. Right in the campground.
Yeah. I have a photograph of it and everything.
It was such a great way to start our day, and our travels were going to be in Rocky Mountain National Park that day. And what a great way for our day to start for our kids. Right after brushing their teeth, we're going to see a moose right on the property. It was really beautiful there. It was nestled in pine trees between mountains and lake, and it was lovely.
And I do need to go back a little bit. You could rent a teepee?
Yeah, a lot of these places I noticed in the Southwest have, like, some of the KOAs also.
Yeah.
You can rent a teepee to stay in. I mean, there's also the famous Wigwam Motel on Route 66.
So the Wigwam Motel are buildings that are in the shape of teepees. Are these teepees made out of animal skins as it would be traditional? Or are they buildings in the shape of a teepee that are really cabins?
I think they're a canvas, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
We'd have to look it up and see. But they seemed like the teepees were made out of large canvas wraps, and they're quite large, actually.
And so the idea is that if you want to do a camping, it looks like they're canvas, looks like you could do a camping trip, but not have to worry about bringing your own RV or your own tent. Got it.
Correct. Yeah, a lot of these RV sites actually have alternative arrangements for people to stay there.
I don't see that as much in the U.S. as I see in some other countries, and I'm starting to see a little more now. That's one of the reasons I was curious.
Yeah, we were pretty interested in this. This was our first time ever RVing, and it's such a thing, but we didn't know anything about it. We just went into it listening to a few podcasts about RV travel, and we rented a Cruise America RV, and we were pretty happy with it. I mean, I'm not sure I'll do it again, but I might. It was really a great way to see this part of the country. I wouldn't recommend it in urban environments, but...
Well, let's pause for a second to talk about your RV experience. You mentioned Cruise America. You also mentioned listening to RV podcast. It's okay to mention the name of another podcast.
We found the RV Miles podcast, which is hosted by Jason and Abby Epperson. They're full-time RVers. They work from their RV, and they have 3 boys in an RV, which I can't imagine. So they have a great sense of humor, and they're really informative on their podcast. It's kind of a travel podcast, but also a how-to RV podcast. So they split their show usually between something about how to get better gas mileage, and then here's how to visit Mesa Verde National Park.
Well, and there is sort of 2 different branches of the RV. There's the RVing for like what you were doing, and then there's the life in an RV. What it sounds like they're more in that camp. We've done at least one episode of This Week in Travel also with RV life, basically people who live in RVs and have at least a couple friends who do that, or at least have done that for longer periods of time.
Yeah, I know some wealthy people who've sold their house and sailed around the world, but I think it's a lot more realistic for me to imagine when I retire, maybe subletting my apartment and driving an RV for a year or 2 to really see America. I think it's a great option.
Well, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about your experience. You say you may or may not do it again. Pluses and negatives. Yeah, pluses and minuses.
So first of all, it's a little more expensive than you think. Like the website says $100 a night, but then when you end up with the per mileage fees or all these other add-ons, which are reasonable and they're spelled out, they did not fool me. They did not pull wool over on me. Right. It ends up being closer to $200 a night, which is also what you'd pay from a private website. You can rent RVs from the owner, and it's usually over $150 a night. It depends on the rig. RVs come in different classes, A, B, and C. One of them is like a bus, one of them is like a truck, and one of them is like a minivan or like a regular pickup truck, but with a bed and a bunch of stuff to camp in on the back of it. And they all get different amounts of mileage, but basically with all of them, you're then going to need to decide where you're spending the night, and you end up choosing a place to book that has hookups, is what it's called. And with us, because we were with kids and we didn't know how often they'd be going to the bathroom, we decided not to do what's called boondocking, which is where you go off the grid and just stay in your RV. We tended to go to places where you could hook up your electricity and your water, and sometimes also dump your sewage, which is the thing that a lot of people find icky about RVing.
Right. Well, and we've talked about that a couple times on the show at various road trip things that we've done, that if you stay in BLM, Bureau of Land Management land, you can boondock and not pay anything potentially for staying for the night. Then if you stay in a national park or a state park, you're paying how much a night?
10 to 20, I think.
Okay. And then you're getting electrical hookup, but not sewage dumping and things like that. Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah, you have to read the print on the website. Almost all the national parks will let you bring an RV into one of their campgrounds, but sometimes they don't have electric. And so if you want electric, you have to check that out. then when you're driving an RV rig that has a bathroom, you usually have a clean water tank in your RV, but you're going to be using that up. And when you use that up, you're filling up your gray water and your black water. So then you're going to want to dump that. So if you're planning an RV trip, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, how many days can I go before I have to dump my water?
Okay.
And so you're like, well, I'll go to a place that doesn't have sewage for 2 nights in a row. And then I'll go to a place that does have sewage for 1 or 2 nights in a row so I can dump it all. And then I'll fill up my fresh water tank and I'll go to a place where I'm going to boondock for, you know what I mean? So you have to plan it out.
Okay. And then just for people who've never done it, how icky is it to dump your gray water?
Well, I guess I can speak to that since Sam did all of the driving, absolutely 100% of the driving. I took on some of the other chores, including cleaning out the black tank, the gray tank. And, it wasn't so bad. I have to say we brought some latex gloves with us. So I used those. It was really just a matter of you clean out the black tank first, and then you clean it out with the gray tank. And so then it sort of flushes itself out. So that was really helpful. And you use some products to help keep the tank clean as well, which we learned about on our trip. So it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
And when you talk about the gray water, we're talking about the water from the shower or from the sink, not from the toilet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We did eat a lot in the RV. That was one of the great benefits as well, as having a bathroom on the RV for, especially with little kids. And so we did end up washing dishes and, of course, using the sink to wash our hands and things like that. So there was that water in the gray tank.
Yeah. And as far as driving goes, this was your typical like truck chassis, but with an elongated back. It got pretty bad gas mileage, like 10 miles to the gallon. And it didn't feel safe going over 65 miles an hour. And I think if you wanted to better get your gas mileage, you're better off driving at 55 or maybe 59 miles an hour, which was a little annoying, but it was fine. And if I had to, I could get it up to 65. It was a pretty good rig. I was really happy. I felt uncomfortable driving it for the first day, and then I got really used to it. And having the kids have a table in front of them was more like traveling by air because the kids could do activities including like watching an iPad, but also even like certain types of activities. They couldn't really write that well while the car's driving, but other activities they could do because they have a table in front of them. And they found it more comfortable than driving in a car. We were so afraid they would get car sick, motion sickness. We brought all this Dramamine, kids Dramamine.
We had different kinds of Dramamine. We had a lollipop version. We had a chewable version.
But they
were so prepared.
They didn't get very nauseous at all. We did give them the Dramamine 2 or 3 times, but they never actually got fully motion sick. And so I guess it wasn't that bad for them at all. It was really nice.
And just to add to that, I mean, we brought some Play-Doh along. They were able to do that on the trip. We had some games that they could play, like a Connect 4 and checkers. So there's definitely things they could do. And even some of the activity books that they received through the National Park Service, they were able to do a little bit of that on the trip. It's not smooth enough to be able to write a letter to someone, for example, but there were some activities they were able to do in their books and even some coloring. So we did, at times, we would be listening to our podcast at the front of the RV. Like we were mentioning, RV Miles was a big part of our experience, which was fantastic for us. And we had some story podcasts for the kids, for them, because they couldn't really hear what we were listening to up front in our seat. So, but it was just to echo it was nice for them to have a whole table in front of them to be able to do their activities and even play with their toys.
Excellent.
More Chumba Casino fan mail. Love this. It says, Dear Ryan, I love Chumba Casino. There's so much fun. I love the wild ride from the social slots to the Slingo to jackpots quicker than a 6-time real spin. Everybody's finding their fun at Chumba Casino. Why don't you find out for yourself? Head to ChumbaCasino.com and enjoy hundreds of casino-style games for free with your welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
Anything else we want to talk about the RV life before we get back to the itinerary?
No, but I do recommend it for people if they want to try it out. I say try it out. Don't be afraid of it.
Okay.
Now, we did drive the RV through Rocky Mountain National Park.
I was going to get there.
On the famous Trail Ridge Road over the Continental Divide. So, and the kids did not get motion sick. So I'm telling you, this RV worked out for us.
Well, this is not a road where you're going to be going 65.
No. Yeah, if you plug it into your GPS, it says it's 1 hour and 10. Don't expect that with all the times you're going to be stopping to take pictures and ooh and ah. So let's talk about Rocky Mountain National Park. We went across the park from west to east. So we started at Grand Lake and entered the Kawanichi Visitor Center. And we ended up finding out from the fantastic rangers that this part of the park is much quieter and less busy. So
Right.
for the whole morning, we didn't see that many people.
Yeah, most people access Rocky Mountain National Park from the east.
Yeah, from Estes Park.
From
right?
Estes Park, right. Because that's where all the population of Colorado is, or most of the population of Colorado is on the right side of the map, on the right side of the Rocky Mountains. And you're now coming in from the left side, from the western side.
Yeah, and we recommend people see this part, especially because if you're the type of person who gets out of your car and walks on trails, you don't want to be that crowded. So we found this part to be really rewarding. The first big hike we did wasn't, I mean, we have kids, it's not a big hike, is we stopped at a place called the Holsworth Historic Site. And it used to be called the Never Summer Ranch. And you'll find it listed that way in old guidebooks, but the Park Service changed it about 10 years ago to the Holsworth Historic Site. And what that is a little bit of a hike where you can walk to the old ranch, the Holsworth Trout Lodge and Never Summer Ranch, that was run from another group of people that started a homestead in 1917. And it's on the headwaters of the Colorado River. So you're walking and you're like at this river that you can almost wade across. I mean, yeah, you could cross it on foot if you had to.
Good, yeah.
And that's where the mighty Colorado starts. And it goes all the way down to carve the Grand Canyon. And I was telling my kids all about it. And I really recommend this hike. And then you can go into the woods if you want to, beyond the Holsworth Historical Site.
It's a really beautiful spot where we were walking through a meadow surrounded by these beautiful mountains covered in pine trees, and able to see in the distance too where some of this water's probably coming from. There are a few small patches of snow still up in the mountains. And so that was really special. And also to recognize that this river, which, like Sam was saying, was not super wide, is the river that's responsible for carving the Grand Canyon. I mean, that's awe-inspiring.
Well, and one thing we should mention is elevation, because we're going to get into that a little more. You haven't gotten really up to the top yet, which is 11,000 feet or so, but you're already at Holsworth at 8,900 feet. So more than a mile and a half up. So judge how much you can do based on that. Because
we'd been on a week-long road trip already.
Yeah.
And in altitude at Zion and Bryce. And Dinosaur National Monument.
Yeah, much of the Colorado Plateau is a mile up.
Yeah.
The Rocky Mountains, when you're in Colorado, there's 14,000 foot peaks. There's a number of peaks that are that tall, but they're starting from 5,000. That basically your whole Colorado Plateau is pretty much a mile up.
Right. So yeah, again, if you're going to be doing this type of tourism, you might want to give yourself a couple days to acclimatize to the altitude.
Well, the other problem we had when we did this, we drove in cross country. It was the last time I've been to Rocky Mountain National Park, is when we drove cross country after college. And our car was adjusted to run at pretty close to sea level in upstate New York, and it nearly died on Trail Ridge Road. Basically, it gave its death rattle, and we thought we were not going to get it to start again because it just wasn't adjusted for the altitude. It did again in Yellowstone, but it was really just altitude. And we were doing the same thing. We were... I remember doing at the very top of the pass, there was a little tiny nature hike that was, I want to say, a quarter mile long. It really wasn't very much, and we would walk 100 feet and then pant, and then walk another 100 feet and then pant. But we had just come into altitude that day or the day before, really.
Right.
We'd been working our way up to Colorado, so maybe a little more than that, but we weren't ready for 11,000 feet.
So I have found, and I wonder if this is your case also, a lot of people I talk to say, oh, you're in a Rocky Mountain National Park. That's my favorite national park. I mean, it's a very popular park.
It's not as well known as some, but it's a gorgeous park.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things for people to do, again, this is like a road trip, is this Trail Ridge Road that you're talking about your vehicle almost dying on. I mean, even if you don't get out of your vehicle, it's an amazing drive.
Oh, absolutely.
So from where we were talking about that little hike at the headwaters of the Colorado, you then climb up. You're at about 9,000 feet. You climb up to about 10,000 feet. And that's where you can find this great little place called Lake Irene, where I shot some very serene photographs. And then the thunderclouds came in and the rain started coming. And we continued up this beautiful trail ridge road with switchbacks until we crossed the tree line. And I got to explain to my kids, this is a tree line. This is where the trees can no longer grow because you're high enough in altitude that the amount of oxygen in the air and the amount of weather patterns and wind and cold makes it less and less likely for the trees to grow. You get these little miniature trees like bonsai at the very end of the tree line where they are just trying to grow and get enough oxygen. And then you get to the Continental Divide, and I got to teach my kids again about geography and about how America's kind of split in half in drainage basins. It's a little over their head, but it was this road, this drive is amazing. And it has the Alpine Visitor Center, which is the highest visitor center in the National Park Service. It's closed for most of the year. They dig it out of like 14 feet of snow in June, I think. And
I can imagine, sure.
This is a summer road trip.
And that might be, I wonder if that's where you had taken that hike. There's an Alpine Ridge Trail there that we took just up to the peak of that mountain there right by the visitor center. It certainly had to take some stops as we were walking up that trail and taking the views while we also were taking our breath.
Right. It is breathtaking in more ways than one. Did your kids see any of the pika?
Yes. So before we get to that, I just want to say the guidebooks say to do the Alpine Ridge Trail, which is at the Alpine Visitor Center with a huge parking lot.
Yeah.
And we hoped to see pika there. And I was calling them Pika because they remind me of Pikachu. So we did not see any pika there. But I'm recommending that people who don't have time to do two trails skip the Alpine Ridge Trail because the views are very similar to those at the Visitor Center. Go to the Visitor Center. Mm-hmm. There's also a concessionaire there that sells hot food as well as a National Park Service gift shop. But the concessionaire's place is huge. I recommend stopping there. But for the hike, if you don't have time to do both of them, drive on the road past the lava cliffs to the Rock Cut pull-off where there's another trail that's still above the tree line, and it's called the Tundra Communities Trail. And that's where we saw marmots and pika, and they were so adorable, and the kids loved it. But then I ended up doing this trail on my own because it started to rain again. So just everyone should know when you're driving at these high altitudes, the weather changes every 100 feet. But this Tundra Communities Trail was my favorite trail that I hiked in the Rocky Mountain National Park. First of all, there were much less people on it because it's not at the visitor center. Second of all, it was like a better view in a lot of ways. And most importantly for me, two things that were important for me. One is there were these placards with beautiful quotes and historical information, the whole walk, just like poetry and literature and facts about the geology and the pika and the marmots. And then at the very end, I got to this rock, and the people who had passed me on the trail had said that there was something special up there. So I kept going, and I was like, oh, I can turn around. I'll keep going. And I saw them. They climbed up on these rocks. There's a plaque in metal that says something about the history of the site, but it doesn't tell you to scramble onto the top of the rocks. But there were people up there. So I followed them up. And at the top of these rocks is this bronze installation that's a kind of a spherical, circular installation that has the distance in kilometers and the height in feet of every major National Park Service unit that in theory you could shine a laser to from this point.
Okay.
And it's just a great moment to be like all by yourself on the top of a rock with the wind almost ripping your hair out of your head and seeing this installation that's kind of like a memento of how far you are from everywhere else in the Americas.
Well, and the elevation of the trailhead for the Tundra Communities Trail is 12,110 feet, roughly 35% less oxygen than you have at sea level. So take your time.
Yeah, but it is mostly flat.
And then we talked about pika and marmots, but we didn't explain what pika and marmots are.
Right. So pika and marmots are rodents, but when they're not in your house, they're adorable and fantastic rodents. I highly recommend everyone take the time to find them.
The pika are very sweet. They make a very sort of high-pitched little sound, too, when they're talking to each other.
They're also known as the whistling hare because of their alarm sound that they call, apparently, which I did not know.
Oh.
Hopefully you don't get to hear them make the alarm sound.
I think they're the inspiration for the Pikachu.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Could be. I don't know that to be the case, but they're high altitude animals that look, I'm not sure, they're smaller than a guinea pig, look closer to a mouse, but somewhat different between the two. And a marmot apparently is in the squirrel family, but it looks a little more plump.
They do. They almost look like beavers.
Yeah,
I'm with you there.
Yeah,
The pika are, I think, related to rabbits, and I think they're in the hare family and the rabbit family, and I think they don't hibernate. I think they just like stay alive eating what they've hoarded all summer,
Huh.
which is incredible. And they're really adorable. And if you look them up online, some people think they did inspire Pikachu. They
Okay.
do look a little bit like Pikachus, which gives people a reason to go out and see nature who might not otherwise climb out of their car. Now, at the rock cut overlook, you can sit on the stone wall and see 10 pika and just going around grabbing their food, because they're basically, summer up here is like 2 months long, and they spend that whole time grabbing edibles.
Excellent. Anything else we want to say about Rocky Mountain National Park before we start to wind this up?
Well, just that you can see elk. There's a lot of wildlife and also bighorn sheep. The most popular part of the park is the Bear Lake area, where there is a park and ride. The parking lot fills up around 8 a.m. The National Park Service Visitor Centers always have a dry erase board where they tell you when it's full. But you can go to the park and ride and get a shuttle up to Bear Lake, which I think is extremely popular for a reason. We skipped it.
Yeah, we just didn't have enough time on our itinerary to hit all of the great spots in Rocky Mountain National Park, but there's more to come back to then.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention is the horseback ride. So we ended up finding a outfitter right at the Fall River Visitor Center.
Okay.
And I'm going to recommend them because they're the closest to the national park. It's called National Park Gateway Stables, and it's run by SK Horses, because all the other ones that do horseback riding in the Estes Park area, they have to go further to get into the national park. I mean, you can have a wonderful horseback ride that's not in the national park, but if you want to include horseback riding in Rocky Mountain National Park, this one not only is like 30 feet from the park entrance, but also they allowed our 5-year-old to ride a horse all by herself. It's ages 4 and up or 5 and up, and each person gets their own horse. There's no tandem riding, and they have 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, and even a 6-hour horseback ride that goes up to the top of a peak and back down again. And they seem to run a really good stable.
Yeah, the horses were great there. They had helmets for the kids. I even wore one just out of precaution. And they tethered our 5-year-old horse to the lead of our trip. So it felt very safe. And the horses are so great there. There was even a runaway horse that somehow ended up on the trail. I'm not sure exactly how this happened, but there was one of their horses ended up on the trail and sort of followed us along and ended up catching up to us. The lead of our trip, he managed to figure out how to best bring that horse back just using his calls. And that horse would sort of stop along the way, occasionally taking a little munch on the grass on the way. But they did a great job of keeping that horse up with our group and brought him back along with us. That was kind of a fun little extra that happened on our trip that they said has never happened to them before.
Yeah, and we also saw a coyote on the horseback ride,
that was fun.
which was really cool. I mean, we've seen it before, but
It sort of was under some bushes along the trail that we were going along. It kind of took a look at us and decided it was going to trot along and go somewhere else. But it was fun to see it along the way.
My kids said, "Can a coyote eat a horse?" And I said, "Not if the horse is alive already."
And no, but we have coyotes in my neighborhood here in California, and occasionally when I see those signs with missing cat, I think, oh, hope that wasn't what happened, because yeah. The one thing you were mentioning, seeing bighorn sheep, and we saw bighorn sheep when we were in the park, but we stayed with some people who lived in Estes Park and had lived there for many years. In fact, I was a friend of ours from college, and his father ran the Rocky Mountain Five and Dime in Estes Park, and they said it wasn't that common to see bighorn sheep every time you go into the park. So we apparently were lucky. I don't know how that has changed in the many years it's been since we've been there.
Yeah, I think there are places in the park, and you can talk to the park rangers, and they'll tell you where to go, but they're not as common. And the elk, we did see one elk, but I think if you time your trip and you stay longer, you can be more likely to see the wildlife, as with all national parks.
As always the case, very much so. Excellent. Anything else we want to talk about the road trip?
I guess just Estes Park is a great city during the summer. I'm not sure what it's like during the winter. And there's the famous Stanley Hotel there, which has tours, and Stephen King spent the night there, and it inspired him to write The Shining. So that's another thing for people to know if they're
So
visiting
tour,
the
but
area.
don't stay.
You can stay, and maybe you'll be inspired to write an award-winning novel.
Unfortunately, we missed that on our trip. So that's another thing that's on our list for when we go back to Rocky Mountain National Park to take that tour. We heard great things about it.
Yeah, and Estes Park has a lot of hotels and motels, and some of them are for RVs, and a lot of the ones that are for RVs have entertainment, like during the summer, like swimming pools. The one we stayed at is Yogi Bear's Jellystone, which is a chain, and they have campsites, cabins, and RV sites, but they also have mini golf and a swimming pool, and during weekends they have themed like events. They have karaoke. They have an ice cream truck that drives around just their like local area for kids. They have an inflatable bounce pad and all these different activities during the summer only and mostly on weekends. But if you're doing the RV thing, it's one of those famous establishments.
Yeah, and if we had a little more time, it would have been great to spend a couple of days there so that the kids could really enjoy the jungle gym more and all these different activities. But we managed to squeeze in a round of mini golf and some really good jungle gym playing time. So that was fantastic.
Excellent. As we go to wind this down, we've done not a huge portion of Colorado there. We've done about half the state up in the northern part. Prettiest spot you saw?
The prettiest point in the park was probably hiking on the Tundra Communities Trail, where there was the tundra and there were pika and marmots, and overhead the wind was in one direction it was raining and in another direction it was sunny, and above my head I saw the eagle just soaring over me, and it was just such an incredible place to be above the tree line in this great almost paved trail. It's very simple to walk on. It's so gorgeous up there.
And I have to say, I really enjoyed the Holtzworth Historic Site and walking through this gorgeous meadow with the Colorado River and getting to feel a sense of how folks homesteaded in that area and how people would have come there for their dude ranch activities and trout fishing and all of that to get a feel for what it was like to live in that area.
Excellent. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in northwestern Colorado, northeastern Utah.
The Dinosaur dispensary at Dinosaur, Colorado. You can walk by a Stegosaurus and get your marijuana fix.
Now, is it a dispensary just for dinosaurs or?
It depends on how much you dispense.
Got it. Excellent. Well, our guests again have been Sam and Mina Oppenheim. Again, you can find Sam's photography at samoppenheim.com. Thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler, and Sam, in your case, coming back on Amateur Traveler and talking about your love for travel, your newfound love for RV travel in the American West.
Thank you for having us, Chris. It's a real pleasure, and we love your podcast. Keep inspiring people to explore.
Thanks so much.
In news of the community, first to thank you to all of those who are supporting Amateur Traveler on Patreon, patreon.com/Amateur Traveler. And then still trying to catch up on some of the Apple podcast reviews that I got. These are from back in April. Please don't stop taking us around the world, says Browning Shooter. You cover my favorite subject, and it's a pleasure to listen to a well-spoken adult who knows their geography and history. I recommend listening to all episodes, as some destinations which one might not expect to hold much interest actually turn out to be among the best. I've always wondered, though, how do you find the time to create a weekly show like this, along with your real job, family, travel, etc.? Thank you, Chris, for your excellent and interesting podcast. Yeah, I'm a little crazy that way, I'd have to say. So yeah, I have a full-time job now actually at a startup company. I've gone back to work after having spent the last 6 years previous to year and a half working at the full-time job, 6 years before that doing part-time contracting work and traveling more. And then on top of that, I do 2 weekly podcasts. I do another one in a faith-based podcast, and then I do an occasional This Week in Travel, and try and get some blog posts out there on CaliforniaTravelMedia.com, as well as some guest posts on Amateur Traveler, and I do some volunteer work. So other than that, you hate to be bored. And then I also got one from Marina the Trader Chick, who said, great to listen to when looking for travel inspiration. In this podcast, you'll find information tips, narrations, and the itineraries for tons and tons of different destinations from around the world. There are countless episodes where you can listen to guests talking about some of their favorite places they have visited and explored thoroughly. Thanks so much, Marina. I am starting to do some more traveling. In fact, we're probably going to take next week off and do a repeat show because I will be on the road for my wife's birthday up in Mendocino and in Sonoma. So I'm doing more travel around California. If you are also starting to get out on the road, let me say from amateurtraveler.com/affiliates, one of the places that you can check out is Airbnb. If you have not used them before and you use the link at amateurtraveler.com/Airbnb, you will get $35 off your first rental. So hopefully you'll try that, and that will help you with your travels, whether they be local or someday international again. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.